Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another session of Learning Together. I am Christian, and this is Language Curriculum class. And in today's session, we are going to learn about curriculum and language instruction, of course, in relation to language curriculum in secondary schools. Language curriculum development is an aspect of a broader field of education known as curriculum development or curriculum studies. Curriculum development focuses on determining what knowledge, skills, and values students learn in schools. What experiences should be provided to bring about the intended learning outcomes, and how teaching and learning in schools or educational systems are planned, measured, and evaluated. Whereas language curriculum development refers to the field of applied linguistics that addresses these issues. It describes the interrelated set of processes that focuses on designing, revising, implementing, and evaluating language program. Now let's talk about the historical background of curriculum development in language teaching. The history of curriculum development in language teaching starts with the notion of syllabus design. Syllabus design is one of the aspects of curriculum development, but it is not identical with it because, in the broader sense, syllabus design is just a part of the entire curriculum development process. A syllabus is a specification of content of a course of instruction and a list of what will be taught and tested. And then syllabus design is the process of developing syllabus. You will know more on syllabus design when you reach the topic syllabus design in the next session, in the next chapter. So these are the types of syllabi that we have: structural syllabus, notional functional syllabus, situational syllabus, skill-based syllabus, task-based syllabus, content-based syllabus. More of this will be discussed in the next chapter. Alright, this is just an overview on the types of syllabus. Again, curriculum development in language teaching, as we know today, really began in 1960s. So this is the overview of the types of syllabi that we have. The thorough discussion for this topic will be done in our next chapter. Okay, if we look at the history of language teaching, it started from the notion of syllabus design. Much of the impetus for changes, or much of the forces that affect the changes in the approaches of language teaching as we are using today, really emerged or came from the changes in teaching method. Okay, the method concept in teaching, the notion of a systematic set of teaching practices based on a particular theory of language and language learning. This is a powerful one, and the quest for better method has been a preoccupation of many teachers and applied linguists since the beginning of the 20th century. Alright, so the development of these methods of teaching is anchored to certain theories or views about how language must be taught to our students, especially in teaching English as second language. Okay, these different approaches and methods in teaching that emerged in the 20th century is anchored in the four theoretical orientations. So let's take a look on what are the four theoretical orientations or the views about language learning, language teaching and learning. Let's have first the structural view. Alright, so structural view believes that language can be reduced to a learnable set of building blocks. These are the building blocks. Talks about the phonological units. When we speak about phonological units, let's talk about phonology and phonetics. Next, we have here the grammatical units. When we talk about grammatical units, this talks about syntax and grammar. Alright, and then we have here the grammatical operations, the adding, the clipping, the lexical items, the vocabulary itself. Alright? So, there are rules known as grammar and syntax that governs how to combine these basic elements. These rules can be memorized to achieve a high level uh, of proficiency in language. And then some proponents would even go far as to saying that there's predetermined sequence in which language should be learned. So according to structural view, there is really this sequence, the pattern, and how language can be learned by the English language learners. And then grammar textbooks, okay? These are the most common material to be used in this kind of view or in the under this category on language, right? So structural view, it talks about the pattern, the sequence, or the grammar that governs language. We have here the next one, the cognitive view. The cognitive view in learning a language puts the learner smack in the center of everything. So cognitive view look to answer questions like, how can a language effectively learn? How does one make a set of vocabulary words memorable and get them embedded in the long-term memory? So in this kind of view, the technique, the strategies, and even the sequence of lesson are learner-led or learner-centered and can't be predetermined. Learning a language is conscious, rational, and information processing event. So when we say cognitive view, this refers really to the learners, the cognitive aspect of the learner, in line with John Piaget's view on language learning. And then the next one we have here, the functional view or the communicative view. Functional view or communicative view often emphasize spoken language over written language and profess that language is a set of grammar rules but rather a tool, okay, for communication. So that is really the purpose of language, for us to communicate with each other. So that's the view that's in line with the functional or communicative view. Communicative view often skew or disregard grammar textbook in exchange for speaking drills and question and answer interactions, where students get a feel of what speaking in the language in a conversation is really like. This is not much on the grammar aspect. This is the opposite for structural view, that they are into grammar. But this one, as long as you can, the functional view or the communicative view of language, as long as you can be understood by the people in the conversation, that will be all right. And then the last one we have here, the psychological view on language teaching. So according to psychological view of language, language learning is seen through issues like learner motivation, predisposition, the locations, conduciveness to learning, the teachers, student dynamics, the stress levels, and etc. These could affect language learning as well. So it would answer the question, is really the teacher supportive enough to the students? Because every now and then the teacher is also a factor in the students' learning. Or it could be the learning environment. Is the classroom dynamic facilitating or inhibiting the acquisition of language? Because in teaching language to our students, we must develop this classroom that is not threatening to them, in order for them to really embrace what has been transpired in the teaching and learning process. So many of the insights of this category are borrowed from the counseling and social psychology. So meaning to say, this is in line with the social learning as well. Students can learn through social observations. So these are the views in language, and more or less the methods and approaches of language teaching that we are having today is anchored or based on this different or the four major theoretic orientations or views about language teaching and learning. Alright, so since the beginning of the 20th century, applied linguists and teachers of English are struggling to to really get what is this best method. They had it in mind. What is this best method that could help in teaching English to our students? So there is a quest now on determining, or yes, determining what method is applicable or essential in teaching English. All right. So many methods have come and gone in the last 100 years in pursuit of the best method. And these are, okay, so these are some of the methods that they had. So according to Richard's um, curriculum development in language teaching. Okay, let's have the first one, the grammar translation method that emerged from 1800 to 1900. Okay, in this case, classes are taught in the student's mother tongue, or we can call this one as L1, with a little active use of the target language. So in here, the teaching of the language is through the use of the L1, or the first language, the native language of the students. It is believed that when you teach something using the student's mother tongue, they can learn better. And more or less that is adopted in our Philippine setting because of the mother tongue based education or learning in the grades 1 to 3. Alright, so it could be the scene for this one in the grammar translation method. The teacher here standing in front of you and then told you to open the book, and then where you can find, for example, verbs and tenses, and then she writes on the board what are the different rules informing the past tense, the present tense, the future tense of the verb, and then the general rules on how to do it, and the exemption. So more or less, in that part, I know that you have experienced that. In that particular sense, the teacher is using the grammar translation method. And more or less, in our case today, we learned through grammar translation method. This is the utilization of textbook, okay? Memorization of grammar, the vocabulary. So that is in line with the grammar translation method. And based on how it is being done inside the class, we can say that this particular method is anchored on the structural view of language learning that emphasizes in the correct use of grammar regardless of the substance or the context of the teaching and learning process. Okay, the ultimate goal of teaching language using grammar translation method is for the students to read and write the target language. Okay, we have the direct method from 1890 to 1930. This is a response to the grammar translation school, and this time rather than the written form, the emphasis is on the spoken language. Okay, so we have to take note this one. If the grammar translation method emphasizes on the written aspect, the direct method now is on the spoken language and the development of the oral skills in the target language, the L2, in our case, the English. Alright? So grammar is not explicitly, but it is learned. Okay, so grammar isn't taught explicitly, but is learned inductively by the students through repeated exposure to spoken language. So there is minimal use of written activity, but more on the speaking engagement. So activities like pantomiming, word picture association, question and answer patterns, the dialogue, the role playing, give the students the chance to figure out the rules for themselves. So this is about the discovery on how the language is being used. So good news for your students, there are no grammar drills or analysis of the written sentences because they have to speak it, alright? So all things, they have to speak it. And remember that only the target language is used in the class. So unlike with the grammar translation method that they are utilizing the L1, the mother tongue, but here only the target language is being used in class. Okay, as a teacher, you won't use the student's mother tongue to teach concepts. Alright, listening and comprehension thus becomes central to this approach. There are no vocabulary lists to memorize, but there are a lot of words and phrases to listen and to become familiar with. Okay, so we have to remember in the direct method, we are exposing our students to the target language because the target language is the language that we use in teaching the child in more on the speaking engagement or spoken language, unlike the grammatical translation. Now let's proceed to the structural method from 1930 to 1960, anchored to a structural view on language teaching and learning, wherein language learning can be reduced to a learnable set of building blocks like grammar and syntax. So this in here, the learner masters the pattern of sentence, structures are different arrangement of words in one acceptable style or the other. So it includes various modes in which clauses, phrases, or word might be used. So this is particularly talking on the phrase, clause, sentence to a pragmatic level. So it is based on the assumption that language can be best learned through scientific selection and grading of the structures and patterns of sentences and vocabulary. Alright, so more or less, structural method is related to grammar translation method because they are anchored to the structural view of language teaching and learning. The only difference is grammar translation is using the mother tongue. Okay, we have here the reading method that emerged from 1920 to 1970. This is a very specific method designed for a specific type of learner. So the main purpose for this method is to really enhance the vocabulary, the enhancement of vocabulary. The type of student that most appreciates this method probably never intends to interact with native speakers in the target language. More or less, he or she is just reading or studying the language because he wants to do something or he wants to accomplish something, but not to the extent that he will interact to the people in the target language. Alright? So a student like this requires only one linguistic skill, that is the reading comprehension skill. So the student would do away with the pronunciation because more or less he would just be reading it, and then do away with the dialogue because he has no intention to interact with the people in the target language. So vocabulary words are learned in context, depending on the context of what he is reading. We teach little grammar using this one in order for the students to really understand what he is reading. So you need to teach the elements like conjunction, phrases, how to put phrases together to form sentences. Okay, in reading method, learning a language is anchored or is both structural because there is a little teaching of grammar, and then functional as well because more or less is learning the function of language in the target language. Next thing, we have the audio lingual method. Okay, this is also known as the army method. That emerged in 1950 to 1970. Okay, the learning is based on the repetition of dialogues. Again, you have to take note the repetition and phrases about everyday situation using the target language. Okay, this method is known as the army method. It's all about the structural patterns. So proponents believe that the language can be reduced to a basic set of sounds. Okay, we have to remember this one, the basic sets of sound. Okay, because they will have to repeat. every dialogue of phrases every day. Okay, so combine them and you have the spoken words. So you have to familiarize the sounds. Those words, when phonetically joined, become phrases and later become sentences and even those discourse. And like the reading approach, the audio lingual method gives higher priority to spoken form than the written form. Classes are generally held using the target language. Okay, or we term this one as L2. Alright? Activities like role-playing, the dialogues are drilled into students until they get the pronunciation and rhythm right. Okay, so in this case, the students would repeat the dialogue, observing on how to pronounce this, how you may sound like this, because that's really the purpose for audiolingual method. If ever there is a mistake in repeating those terms, those words, there will be an immediate and gentle correction. So every now and then they have to be corrected, because the sole purpose for this one is to really master, okay, the sound, the pronunciation of the words in the target language. Okay, so the end goal is the forming of linguistic speaking habit. Okay, the speaking skill of the learners. How they do this? Through repetition. All right, so this is another way. This is anchored on the other aspect or other view of language learning, which is a behaviorism. This particular method here is anchored in the behaviorist perspective or view that is under the School of Psychology, that language can be learned through repetition, imitation, and reinforcement. Okay, so that's the case here in audio lingual method. The next one is the situational method. This is also known as the oral approach. Okay, in here, the speech, the structures, and the focus and the set of basic vocabulary items are seen as the basis of language learning. Though this is kind of unknown to some of the teachers, but it has a big influence on language courses. This is kind of similar to a structuralist view, but situational method emphasizes on the presentation of the structure. If the structuralist view focuses on the structure itself, this situational method here is on the presentation, okay, of the structure. So how are you going to present the structure in a certain situation? So situational language teaching or situational method is characterized by two major features. First, it focuses on the vocabulary, okay, the vocab of that particular language, and the second, on the classification its grammatical structure into sentence patterns. We can infer that the emphasis is on the oral practice. So we have here the next one, the communicative approach from 1970 up until the present time. So the interactive activities are the hallmark of this approach. Communication is essentially the rationale for language, in the communicative approach seeks to develop those skills that enable students to meaningfully engage with each other. Okay, so as teachers, our responsibility using this approach is to give the students much opportunity to give and receive meaningful communication as possible. For example, you let your students introduce themselves, share their hobbies, using the target language. Okay, so I have to emphasize here that we use the target language. In our case, target language, or the L2. In our case, the English. Instead of just presenting the language here, you're giving them the task that they can only be accomplished using the language. Okay, so in the communicative approach, in teaching the English language, the students experience the target language because more or less they are using it as experienced by the native speaker. So our goal here in using the communicative approach is to have this communicative competence that they can be like the native speakers of the language. Alright? So part of the modern way of teaching, though this is not included in the history, but I have to include this one. Part of this is under more or less the core of communicative approach or the humanistic design of the curriculum. The next methods will be teaching to you or will be discussing to you are the modern way of teaching language. We have here the first one, the silent way. This is where your teacher who talks a little as possible. This is also known as the alternative approach. Believe that teaching too much can sometimes get in the way of learning. So it is argued that students learn best when they discover rather than simply repeat what the teacher said. So in teaching using the silent way, silence is a tool in the teaching and learning process. Since you as a teacher, you talk a little as much as possible, you need to employ a lot of gestures and facial expressions to communicate with your students, and if there's a need for you to use props, you can do it. Okay, the next one we have this one. This is the modern way of teaching language. We have the community language learning. It is called community language learning because the class learns together as one unit. So in here, the teacher is not really the teacher but a facilitator at the side, not listening to the same lecture but interacting in the target language. Okay, using the language. The teacher's role now is that of a counselor, a guide, an encourager, or just a facilitator of learning. This is how you are going to do this in class. So you can have your students sit in a circle or a small group, and then this particular type of learning, we can call this one a CLL. This is a student lead type of learning, wherein the students initiate the action or initiates the conversation. And the next one, we have this Suggestopedia. This method developed out of the belief that human brain could process great quantities of material given the right conditions and learning like relaxation. So in here, you are, for example, you are having this particular topic or discussing this particular topic, but there is this musical background, relaxing musical background. Okay, but then again, this is selective because we have a lot of ways in learning a particular topic. So in this Suggestopedia here, you are incorporating, you are using music as your tool in teaching. Okay, there is this musical background, relaxing musical background, just like in the spa. Alright, so it is believed that when there is this music around you, it can relax your brain, your mind, so that you can accept more learning. Alright, total physical response approach is an approach to language teaching where gestures, actions, and movements play a vital role in language acquisition. Total physical response believes that when your students see movement and when they themselves move, their brains create more neural connections. That makes more efficient language acquisition. So there is now this movement, okay, gestures and actions, all right? That's why when you are teaching using the total physical response, you will be flipping your hands a lot. There will be widening of your eyes. There will be body movement. You can be. It could have your hand gestures. This is that you can catch up on the exercise, but this is to teach your students the basic language skills and for them to really visualize, to understand more what you are teaching them. All right. So, are you familiar with the Simon Says? Because when you say Simon Says, close your eyes, you will perform the closing of eyes. Okay, so that is when you are using this total physical response in the classroom, you will more or less, or you are likely having this icebreaker all the time because there is this action of the teacher. Para this is also to have visualization of the learners and for them not to be bored in class as well. Okay, so in using this total physical response, you really have to use your body. The mentioned methods and approaches that comes after the communicative approach are the modern way of teaching language. Okay, as you can see, there has been a lot of changes in our quest for really getting what is the appropriate method of teaching the language. Right, not just the teaching methods and approaches or the problem in the curriculum development when it comes to language teaching. We have also this a selection problem. So with regards to that, that will be discussed in the part 2 of this session. So I will just post the link in the description for the part 2 of our discussion regarding selection problems in language teaching.